A racist pharmacist thinks that a black man has a fake prescription, so he calls security to throw the black man out. However, he regrets it the next day when the black man fights back by exposing the pharmacist for the racist he is. Jamal Harris stepped into the small pharmacy, the familiar chime ringing overhead as the door swung shut behind him. He was here for something simple, routine. His doctor had prescribed him medication just yesterday, and this was the closest pharmacy to his place. He expected to be in and out in a few minutes, but as he walked up to the counter, he couldn't shake a subtle tension that had started to build inside him. Behind the counter, a middle-aged white man, Harold, according to his name tag, barely looked up from his paperwork. His demeanor was detached, as if Jamal had already disrupted his day by simply existing in the space. Jamal offered a polite smile as he handed over the slip of paper. "Afternoon," he said. Harold took the prescription with a quick glance at Jamal, his eyebrows knitting together in mild suspicion. He held the slip up to the light, studying it longer than seemed necessary. "You get this from a real doctor?" Harold asked, his tone flat, his eyes flicking up and down between the paper and Jamal. Jamal frowned slightly but kept his voice calm. "Yeah, just yesterday. Can you fill it?" Harold didn't respond right away. Instead, he squinted at the prescription again, his frown deepening, before glancing up at Jamal with a look that was now unmistakably skeptical. "I'm going to check something in the back," he muttered, turning on his heel before Jamal could say anything else. Jamal watched him disappear behind a door marked "Staff Only." He stood there, trying to shake off the unease creeping up his spine. He had done this plenty of times before. Hand over the prescription, wait a few minutes, leave with his medication. But today, something felt different. Minutes ticked by. Jamal glanced around the empty pharmacy, growing more uncomfortable as time passed. Finally, Harold reappeared from the back room, prescription still in hand. His expression hadn't softened at all. In fact, it seemed colder now. "Nope," Harold said flatly, dropping the paper back on the counter. "This is fake. I'm not filling it." Jamal blinked, taken aback. "Fake?" he repeated, his confusion quickly turning into frustration. "What do you mean, fake? That's a legitimate prescription. You can call the doctor to verify it." Harold shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. "I don't need to call anyone. I've seen enough. This is a forgery. I'm not going to be the one to enable this." Jamal's stomach tightened as he realized what was happening. He'd seen that look in Harold's eyes before. He'd heard that tone, and now it was all clicking into place. "Enable?" Jamal repeated, his voice low, incredulous. "What are you talking about? This is my medication. It's not some—" Harold cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Look, I know what this is," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can just walk in here with some fake script and get whatever you want? I'm not filling this. I'm not giving you any pills." Jamal's eyes narrowed, his temper beginning to rise. "Pills. This is a prescription from my doctor." Harold snorted, an ugly smirk spreading across his face. "Yeah, sure. Just another guy looking for a quick fix, huh? You think I haven't seen this before? People like you come in here all the time trying to score pills. I'm not going to enable some junkie." The word junkie hit Jamal like a slap to the face. His jaw clenched, and he had to remind himself to stay calm, but his patience was running dangerously thin. "Excuse me?" Jamal's voice was sharp now. "I'm not a junkie. I'm here to fill a legitimate prescription. You don't know anything about me, and you're just assuming—" "I'm not assuming anything," Harold shot back, cutting him off again. "I know exactly what's going on here. Don't think you can fool me with some piece of paper. You're not getting anything from me." Jamal's fists tightened at his sides, his heart racing. He tried to keep his cool, but every word out of Harold's mouth was pushing him closer to the edge. "You didn't even check anything," Jamal said through gritted teeth. "You went back there and came out with nothing. You didn't call anyone. You didn't verify anything." Harold shrugged, his smug expression unwavering. "I don't need to call anyone. I've been doing this job long enough to spot a fake. And this," he waved the prescription in the air, "is fake." Jamal took a step closer, his frustration boiling over. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "I'm telling you, this is real. You're refusing to fill my prescription because of what? Because you assume I'm trying to pull something?" Harold scoffed. "Because I know you're pulling something. People like you think you can come in here, try to scam your way into getting meds, and walk out without any consequences." Jamal's eyes blazed with fury. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. "People like me? What exactly do you mean by that?" Harold didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. The air between them was thick with tension, and Jamal could feel the stares of the other customers in the pharmacy as they watched the scene unfold. "Look," Harold said finally, his tone dismissive, "I don't care what your story is. You're not getting anything here. Now, I suggest you leave before we have a bigger problem." Jamal didn't move. He wasn't going to let this man walk all over him. "I'm not going anywhere until you do your job. Call the doctor and verify it." Harold sighed dramatically, as if Jamal was wasting his time. "All right then," he said, nodding toward the security guard who had been standing near the door. "Let's see if you want to stick around after talking to him." The guard, a tall, burly man, started walking toward them, his expression serious. Jamal could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, but he wasn't backing down. Not this time. He turned back to Harold, his voice steady but seething. "You're going to regret this." Harold smirked again, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. "I doubt that." Jamal stayed rooted in place as the security guard approached, bracing himself for what was about to come. He wasn't leaving without a fight, not when he knew he was in the right. But the day wasn't going to end the way he had planned. Jamal stood his ground as the security guard approached, his jaw clenched and heart racing. The air inside the pharmacy felt thick with tension. Every breath he took heavy with frustration. The security guard, a tall, muscular man with a grim expression, stopped a few feet away, giving Jamal a measured look. "Sir, we need to ask you to leave," the guard said, his voice calm but firm. Jamal could feel his pulse in his temples, but he wasn't about to back down. Not when he knew he was in the right. "I'm not leaving until he calls my doctor," Jamal said, his voice tight. "This is a legitimate prescription, and I have the right to have it filled." Harold, still standing behind the counter with his arms crossed, let out a low chuckle. "You're just wasting everyone's time. I told you already, I'm not calling anyone. We're done here." The security guard glanced between Jamal and Harold, clearly unsure of the situation, but leaning toward Harold's authority. "Look, I don't want to make this difficult," the guard said, his tone softening a little. "But if you don't leave, we're going to have to remove you." Jamal's anger flared. He turned to the security guard, trying to keep his voice steady. "All I'm asking is for him to verify the prescription. It's not a big ask. This isn't about anything else, but him assuming I'm up to something because I'm black." The guard shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Jamal's gaze. "Sir, I don't know about that, but you can't stay here if they're refusing service. It's policy." "Policy?" Jamal scoffed. "This isn't about policy. This is about him refusing to do his job because of his own damn prejudices." Harold snorted from behind the counter. "Oh, don't pull the race card. That's not what this is about, and you know it. You're the one who came in here with a fake prescription trying to get pills." Jamal's fists clenched at his sides, the anger bubbling dangerously close to the surface. He could feel the eyes of the other customers on him, watching the scene unfold. He was painfully aware of how things would look. A black man refusing to leave, the security guard ready to throw him out. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable," Jamal said, turning his focus back to the guard. "I just want him to do his job. Call the doctor. Verify the prescription. That's it. If it's fake, fine. But don't just assume I'm some junkie." The guard hesitated, but Harold quickly stepped in, voice dripping with condescension. "I told you, I'm not going to enable you. I'm not filling it, and I'm not calling anyone. If you don't leave, security will escort you out." End of discussion. Jamal stared at Harold, his hands trembling with frustration. He was on the edge of losing control, and he knew it. But he also knew that if he lashed out, it would only make things worse. He had to keep his composure no matter how much Harold's words stung. "You're unbelievable," Jamal muttered. "I'm just trying to get my medication like any other customer. You haven't even given me a reason why you won't call the doctor." Harold gave him a smirk, the kind that said he knew exactly what he was doing and had no intention of backing down. "I don't need to explain myself to you. You're the one trying to scam us, not the other way around." The security guard took a step closer, his patience thinning. "Sir, this is your last warning. Either leave on your own, or we'll have to remove you." Jamal's chest tightened. He knew he wasn't going to get anywhere with Harold, not like this. He could see the smug satisfaction on the pharmacist's face, knowing full well that he held the power in this situation. But the idea of walking away felt like a defeat he couldn't stomach. Jamal took a breath, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "I'm not leaving until you call my doctor." The guard's expression hardened. "Then I'll have to escort you out." Before Jamal could respond, the guard reached for his arm, firmly, but not aggressively. Jamal jerked away, his voice rising. "Don't touch me. I haven't done anything wrong." Customers around the pharmacy started murmuring, some stepping back from the scene, Clearly nervous about where things were headed, Harold leaned against the counter, watching with a satisfied smirk. The guard stepped in closer, his grip firmer this time as he grabbed Jamal's arm. "I'm asking you to leave." Jamal's voice was louder now, frustration spilling over. "You're all making a mistake. I haven't done anything. This is my medication." The guard, unfazed, started guiding Jamal toward the door. Jamal resisted, but he knew there was no use in fighting. He wasn't going to let himself be dragged out like some criminal. Not in front of all these people. As they neared the door, Harold called out, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You should have just left when you had the chance. Next time, try somewhere else. Maybe they'll fall for it." Jamal's whole body tensed, every muscle screaming to turn around and yell, to tell Harold exactly what he thought. But he bit back the anger, keeping his head high as the security guard led him out the door. The cold air hit Jamal's face as he stepped outside, but the heat of his anger lingered. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He wasn't going to let Harold get away with this. Jamal walked down the sidewalk, the frustration and anger still bubbling just beneath his skin. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, clenched into tight fists. The encounter at the pharmacy had left him feeling humiliated, but more than that, it had stirred something he couldn't quite shake. He wasn't going to let this go, but for now, he just needed to clear his head. As he rounded the corner, heading in the direction of his apartment, he heard the sound of tires screeching. A police car pulled up beside him, lights flashing. Jamal's pulse quickened, but he kept walking, hoping this wasn't what he thought it was. "Hey, you!" a voice called from the police cruiser. Jamal stopped in his tracks, his stomach sinking. Slowly, he turned to face the officers. Two white officers were getting out of the car, hands resting on their belts. One of them, a stocky man in his 40s, walked toward Jamal with a hard look on his face. "You got a minute?" the officer asked, his tone making it clear that it wasn't a question. Jamal swallowed his frustration and nodded. "What's this about?" The officer stopped a few feet from him, eyeing Jamal like he was sizing him up. "We got a call from a pharmacy over on Elm. The pharmacist says you were causing a disturbance. Something about a fake prescription." Jamal's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm, though his words came out clipped. "That's not what happened. I was trying to fill a legitimate prescription, and the pharmacist refused. He wouldn't even call to verify it." The officer, his name tag read Reynolds, raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "That's not what he told us. He said you were getting aggressive, trying to pass off a forged script." Jamal's jaw tightened. "I didn't get aggressive until he accused me of being a junkie and refused to call my doctor. He's lying." Officer Reynolds exchanged a glance with his partner, a younger cop who hadn't said a word yet. He was hanging back, watching the interaction closely. "We're going to need to see that prescription," Reynolds said, holding out his hand. Jamal pulled the crumpled slip of paper from his pocket and handed it over. Reynolds took it, his eyes scanning the information for a moment before glancing back at Jamal. "You're telling me this is real?" Reynolds asked. "Yes," Jamal said, trying to keep his tone even. "It's real. My doctor prescribed it yesterday. If you call the number on there, you can confirm it." Reynolds sighed, clearly not convinced. He nodded to his partner, who took out his phone and stepped aside to make the call. The silence that followed felt suffocating, and Jamal stood there, arms crossed, waiting for what felt like the inevitable. "You know," Reynolds said, breaking the silence, "if this turns out to be a fake, things could get a lot worse for you." Jamal shot him a hard look. "It's not fake," Reynolds shrugged, clearly unconcerned by Jamal's response. "We'll see." Minutes ticked by as the younger officer spoke into the phone, his voice low and difficult to hear. Jamal could feel the weight of Reynolds' gaze on him, the tension thick in the air. He had been through this before, being treated like a criminal for simply existing, for trying to do something that should have been simple. But no matter how many times it happened, it didn't get easier. Finally, the younger officer walked back over, slipping his phone into his pocket. He glanced at Reynolds, shaking his head. "It's legit. I spoke with the doctor's office. Prescription checks out." For a brief moment, a flicker of relief washed over Jamal, but it was quickly drowned out by the simmering anger that hadn't left him since he walked into that pharmacy. He looked at Reynolds, waiting for him to say something. Reynolds stared at his partner, clearly not thrilled with the outcome. He let out a long breath before turning back to Jamal. "All right," he said, handing the prescription back. "You're free to go." Jamal took the prescription but didn't move. He was too angry to walk away now, not after everything. "That's it?" Jamal said, his voice low and controlled. "You harass me, accuse me of fraud, and now I'm just supposed to walk away like nothing happened?" Reynolds frowned, clearly not used to being questioned. "We were following up on a call. You caused a disturbance. No, Jamal shot back, his voice sharp. I didn't cause a disturbance. I was trying to fill a prescription, and your friend at the pharmacy decided he didn't like the way I looked. He called you, and now you're treating me like a criminal. Reynolds stiffened, clearly not liking where this conversation was headed. Watch your tone. Jamal stepped closer, his eyes locked on Reynolds. No, you watch your tone. I've been dealing with this my entire life. People like him assuming I'm guilty of something just because I walked into a store. And now you're here, backing him up, without even considering that maybe I'm not the problem. Reynolds' face hardened. We got a call. We responded. That's how this works. Jamal shook his head, frustration pouring out. That's the problem. You respond to people like him without thinking twice, but I'm the one who ends up handcuffed, thrown in the back of your car, or worse. Meanwhile, he's still at that pharmacy. No consequences for what he did. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, but Reynolds just glared at Jamal. You're free to go. Don't push it. Jamal took a deep breath, forcing himself to let the anger settle. He knew better than to keep pushing, but the words were already on the tip of his tongue. Instead, he turned away, feeling the weight of the injustice settle even deeper into his bones. As he started to walk off, he heard Reynolds mutter under his breath, just loud enough for him to hear. Should have just filled it somewhere else. Jamal paused but didn't look back. He wasn't done with this. Not by a long shot. This wasn't over yet. Jamal couldn't sleep that night. The encounter with Harold, the security guard, and the police replayed in his head like a bad dream that wouldn't go away. The blatant disrespect, the way everyone in that pharmacy had looked at him like he didn't belong, it gnawed at him. And then the police, treating him like he was already guilty without bothering to listen, only reinforcing what Harold had started. By the time the morning light filtered through his blinds, Jamal had made a decision. He wasn't going to let it go, not this time. He was going back to that pharmacy, and he was going to do what he should have been able to do the day before. Fill his prescription. The right way. After getting dressed and grabbing the prescription, now slightly crumpled from the day before, he made his way back toward the pharmacy. As he walked, Jamal's jaw tightened with determination. There was a small sense of fear in the back of his mind, a nagging thought that things might get worse, but that fear was drowned out by the overwhelming sense of indignation. By the time he reached the pharmacy, the sun was high in the sky, and the streets were busy with the usual midday traffic. He walked through the door, the familiar chime greeting him again. The same sterile white walls seemed a little colder today, but this time, Jamal wasn't letting them intimidate him. Behind the counter stood Harold, looking just as smug as before. His eyes flickered with something like surprise when he saw Jamal walk in. But the smile that curled on his lips told Jamal he wasn't expecting much of a fight. Well, look who's back, Harold drawled, folding his arms. You just don't give up, do you? Jamal didn't rise to the bait. He walked straight to the counter and placed the prescription down with a firm thud. I'm here to fill my prescription, he said, keeping his voice steady and measured, despite the anger simmering underneath. Harold snorted. You really think I'm going to fill this after yesterday? You should have found somewhere else to try your little scam. Jamal's hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to take a breath. It's not a scam. The police called my doctor. They confirmed that it's legitimate. Harold's smirk faltered slightly, but his arrogance remained intact. That doesn't mean I have to fill it. I've already told you. I'm not going to enable. I don't care what you think you're enabling, Jamal interrupted, his voice finally breaking through the calm exterior. This isn't about you. This is about me, and I need my medication. I'm not going anywhere until you do your job. Harold's expression darkened, his mouth curling into a sneer. You think you can come in here and tell me how to do my job? I don't take orders from people like you. Jamal's blood boiled, the thin veil of composure slipping further away. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. People like me? You mean a paying customer? Someone who has every right to be treated with basic human decency? Human decency? Harold laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You're the one who walked in here yesterday causing trouble, making a scene. If anything, you're lucky I didn't press charges. Press charges? Jamal's voice was incredulous now, his hands gripping the counter. I was trying to get my medication and you treated me like a criminal. You refused to call the doctor, you accused me of being a junkie, and now you think you can stand there and act like you did nothing wrong? Harold shook his head, the smugness returning. You're delusional. You should have just left when you had the chance. Jamal felt the anger rise again, hot and sharp. But before he could respond, the door to the pharmacy opened, and in walked two familiar faces. Officer Reynolds and his partner from the day before. Jamal turned to face them, his chest tightening. They had returned to the pharmacy, likely on Harold's request, but this time Jamal wasn't going to let them silence him. Perfect timing, Harold said with a smug smile, looking over at the officers. Our friend here is causing trouble again. I'm guessing you'll want to handle this. Jamal shot a glance at the officers, his heart pounding. Reynolds' face was unreadable, but his partner looked uncomfortable. Jamal knew the situation was teetering on the edge of something worse. His entire body felt tense, ready to defend himself, but he forced himself to stay calm. I'm not causing trouble, Jamal said, turning to face the officers directly. I came back to fill my prescription, the same one you confirmed was legitimate yesterday. He's refusing to fill it again, and now he's calling you because I won't just leave. Reynolds looked between Jamal and Harold, clearly weighing the situation. Is that true? He asked, glancing at Harold. Harold's smile slipped a little, but he shrugged. Look, I don't trust this guy. I've seen scams like this before. Just because his prescription's real doesn't mean he's not trying to game the system. Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. He stepped forward, speaking directly to Reynolds. I'm not gaming anything. I need this medication. That's all this is about. He's refusing to do his job because of some personal bias, and I'm not leaving until it's filled. For a moment, the air hung thick between them. Jamal could see the tension in Reynolds' face, but something shifted in the officer's posture. He wasn't as rigid, not as confrontational as before. Reynolds sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. Harold, you verified the prescription's real? Harold hesitated, clearly not expecting the question. Well, the police did yesterday, but I still don't. If it's real, Reynolds cut him off, his voice firmer now, then you have no reason to keep refusing him service. Jamal's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time, Harold looked unsure of himself. His smirk was gone, replaced with a flicker of discomfort. I don't have to fill anything I'm not comfortable with, Harold muttered, his bravado faltering. Legally, if the prescription's verified, you can't refuse, Reynolds said, his tone edged with finality. And if you keep holding this up, there's going to be a bigger issue here. Harold's face flushed, and for the first time he looked genuinely unsettled. He glanced between Jamal and Reynolds, clearly weighing his options. Jamal didn't say anything. He just waited, his heart pounding as he watched Harold wrestle with his pride. Finally, Harold let out a frustrated sigh and turned away, grabbing a form from the counter. He didn't say another word as he begrudgingly began to fill the prescription. Jamal exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the tension lift just a little. But this wasn't a victory. It was simply what should have happened from the start. As Harold silently handed Jamal the medication, their eyes met briefly, and Jamal saw something flicker in Harold's expression. Defeat. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jamal took the bag and nodded. Thanks, he said, his voice steady. Without another word, Jamal turned and walked out of the pharmacy, the officers watching him leave. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, he'd take the small win. Jamal sat at his kitchen table, staring at the small orange bottle of pills that had caused all the trouble. His mind was a whirlwind of frustration, anger, and disbelief. He had finally gotten the medication he needed, but the battle to do so had left him drained. And it wasn't just about the prescription. It was about the way he'd been treated. How easily Harold had dismissed him. How quickly the police had assumed he was at fault. He couldn't let it go. Not this time. This wasn't just about him. It was about every time someone like Harold used his position of power to dehumanize someone based on skin color. Jamal knew that he had to do more than just stand up for himself. He had to make sure this didn't happen again. To anyone. Jamal opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He'd never been the type to seek attention or make waves, but this situation demanded more than silence. The media could amplify his voice in a way he couldn't on his own. Maybe it was time to go public. After some hesitation, Jamal typed a quick message to one of the local news stations. He kept it simple but detailed enough to catch their attention. Subject: discrimination at local pharmacy. Hello, my name is Jamal Harris, and I experienced blatant discrimination yesterday at a local pharmacy while trying to fill a legitimate prescription. The pharmacist accused me of fraud without reason, refused to verify the prescription, and called the police on me. I was forcibly removed from the store by security and later stopped by the police, only to have my prescription confirmed as real. Despite this, the pharmacist still refused to fill it until the police stepped in. I believe this is a case of racial profiling and would like to share my story. Best regards, Jamal Harris. He read over the email one last time before hitting send, It felt strange, putting himself out there like this. But something about hitting that send button felt liberating, like he was finally taking control of the narrative. Within a few hours, his phone buzzed with an email from one of the producers at the station. They were interested. They wanted to meet with him and hear his story in person. The quick response surprised Jamal, but he knew the weight of what he had experienced would resonate. Later that week, Jamal found himself sitting across from a reporter named Linda Price, a seasoned journalist who specialized in covering community stories. She was polite and professional, but Jamal could tell she was eager to dig into the details. "Thanks for reaching out, Jamal," Linda began, setting up her recorder on the table between them. "We've heard about similar incidents of racial profiling at other places around town, but your story, well, it seems particularly egregious. Do you mind walking me through what happened?" Jamal nodded, his fingers tapping nervously on his leg beneath the table. "It all started when I went to fill my prescription at the pharmacy," he began. "The pharmacist took one look at me and the prescription and decided it was fake. He didn't even try to verify it. He just assumed." As he continued to recount the events, Linda's expression shifted from curiosity to something like disbelief and outrage. She didn't interrupt him, but he could see her taking careful notes. "He called security on me, had me thrown out like I was some criminal. The police stopped me later, and even after they confirmed the prescription was legitimate, that pharmacist still refused to fill it until the police got involved again." Linda raised an eyebrow. "And this was all because he just assumed you were trying to commit fraud?" Jamal nodded. "He even called me a junkie. I had a legitimate prescription from my doctor, but none of that mattered. It was just about how I looked." Linda leaned forward, her expression serious. "How did that make you feel, being treated that way?" Jamal hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "It made me feel like I didn't matter, like my word, my dignity, didn't mean anything because of someone's assumptions about me. It's not the first time I've experienced something like this, but it was definitely one of the worst." Linda scribbled in her notebook, her brow furrowed. "And what do you hope comes from telling your story?" Jamal took a deep breath. "I just want accountability, not just for me, but for everyone who's been through something like this. That pharmacist had no right to treat me like that, and he should face consequences for what he did. This isn't just about a prescription. It's about how people like him use their positions of power to discriminate against others. I want that to change." Linda smiled slightly, nodding. "I think your story could make a real impact, Jamal. We'll make sure people hear about this." Within days of the interview airing, Jamal's story exploded across social media and local news outlets. The headline read, "Local man falsely accused of prescription fraud, faces discrimination at pharmacy." The news segment showed footage of Jamal calmly telling his side of the story. But it was the audience reaction that truly made waves. Comments poured in on social media, some expressing outrage at what Jamal had endured, others calling for an investigation into the pharmacy's practices. The story gained traction quickly, and soon enough, the local community began to rally behind Jamal, demanding justice. But it wasn't just the public who took notice. The pharmacy's corporate office was flooded with complaints, and in a matter of days, an official statement was released announcing that an internal investigation was underway. Harold's actions were being reviewed, and the company promised to take appropriate action. Jamal couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication as the pressure mounted on the pharmacy and Harold. It wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something bigger, about exposing a problem that ran deeper than one encounter at a pharmacy counter. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from Linda Price. "Jamal, you should know that the pharmacy is feeling the heat. Keep an eye on the news. Things are moving fast." Jamal smiled faintly, a feeling of justice finally beginning to take root. It wasn't over, but the tide was turning. Harold had been so sure of himself, so confident in his power, but now the world was watching, and the walls were starting to close in. Jamal sat in his living room, staring out the window as the sounds of the city drifted in through the open pane. It was quiet in his apartment, but his mind was anything but. The last few days had been a whirlwind. His story going public, the flood of support from people he didn't even know, and the ultimate fallout with Harold being fired. He'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for the consequences to hit Harold. But now that it had happened, Jamal wasn't sure how to feel. He'd spent years brushing off these kinds of encounters, people assuming things about him, making judgments based on nothing more than the color of his skin. He had learned to push it down, move on, tell himself that it wasn't worth the fight. But this time had been different. This time, it was too much to ignore. Jamal leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face as he thought about everything that had led him here. When Harold first refused to fill his prescription, Jamal had felt something snap inside him, an old anger he had learned to suppress. It wasn't just about the medication. It was about all the times he'd been looked at sideways, all the times he'd been judged without anyone bothering to know him. And it was about the fact that, for once, he wasn't going to walk away quietly. When he'd sent that email to the news station, he hadn't expected much. Maybe a short piece, a few people paying attention, but the response had been overwhelming. People had rallied behind him, pushing for change, calling out the pharmacy for what it was, a place where someone in power had used their position to discriminate. And then Harold had been fired. Jamal thought about Harold, the man who had stood so smugly behind the counter, so sure of himself, so sure that Jamal's voice didn't matter, that his authority was unshakable. Jamal had been ready to hate him, but now, as he reflected on the situation, he didn't feel the satisfaction he'd expected. Sure, Harold had lost his job, and there was a certain vindication in that, but firing him wouldn't undo the experience. It wouldn't take away the anger and humiliation Jamal had felt, and it wouldn't change the fact that this kind of thing happened all the time, to people who didn't have a platform or a voice to push back. There was a quiet anger simmering inside him still, but it wasn't aimed at Harold alone anymore. It was about the system, the way things had been set up so that people like Harold could act on their prejudices without fear of consequences. Jamal knew Harold was just one person in a larger problem, and that problem wasn't going to go away with one man losing his job. Jamal stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the world below. Life was continuing on, as it always did, and yet here he was, caught in this internal conflict. He had taken action, spoken up, and made a difference, but it didn't feel like enough. He thought about all the people who had reached out to him since the news broke. Some had shared their own experiences with discrimination, while others had simply expressed their support. The sheer volume of stories that mirrored his own was staggering. It made him realize that this wasn't just about his one experience. It was about a pattern of assumptions, of biases, of people in power using that power against others. Jamal sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. He hadn't gone looking to be a voice for anyone. He had only wanted to fill his prescription and be treated like any other customer. But now, whether he wanted it or not, his story had become part of something bigger. As much as he wanted to walk away and put the whole thing behind him, he knew he couldn't. This was about more than just Harold. It was about every person who had ever been treated like they didn't belong, like they didn't matter. It was about speaking up, not just for himself, but for all of them. Jamal sat back down, looking at the laptop on the table. He thought about the countless messages of support he had received, the stories of others who had experienced something similar. It was overwhelming, but it was also a reminder that his fight wasn't over. He had been given a platform, and he had used it to make a small difference. But small wasn't enough. He had to decide what came next. He could walk away now, satisfied that Harold had been fired, or he could keep going. He could keep pushing, keep speaking out, and try to make a real impact. The decision weighed heavily on him. He wasn't sure what the right path forward was. But one thing was clear. Silence wasn't an option anymore. He had been silent for too long. Tomorrow he'd go back to the pharmacy. He wasn't sure what he'd say, but he knew he had to face that place again. Maybe he would feel a sense of closure, or maybe he'd find that there was more to the story than just Harold losing his job. Either way, Jamal knew he had to see it through. This wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what would happen next. Jamal stood outside the pharmacy, staring at the familiar glass door, the same door he had walked through the day Harold had humiliated him, the day security had thrown him out. It had been a week since the media storm, a week since Harold had been fired, but Jamal hadn't come back until now. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The familiar chime rang overhead as he stepped inside. The space felt different, quieter somehow, but still the same sterile white walls, the same aisles lined with everyday items. For a moment, the memories of that day came rushing back. Harold's smug face, the security guard's heavy hand on his arm, the humiliation of being treated like he didn't belong. But things were different now. Harold was gone, and Jamal was walking in here on his own terms. Behind the counter stood the new pharmacist. He looked up and gave Jamal a nod of recognition. "Good to see you again," he said with a small smile. "What can I do for you today?" Jamal walked up to the counter, his prescription already in hand. "Just here to get this filled," he said, keeping his voice casual. He wasn't here to make a scene. This was just another trip to the pharmacy, like it should have been from the start. The pharmacist took the slip of paper, glancing at it before turning back to his computer. As he worked, Jamal's eyes wandered around the store. Near the back, he saw a man hunched over a box, packing up what looked like the last of someone's personal belongings. Jamal's chest tightened when he realized who it was. Harold. Harold had his back turned, wearing a plain shirt instead of his pharmacist's coat, methodically packing up the remnants of his life at the pharmacy. Jamal had known that Harold was fired, but seeing him here, reduced to cleaning out his desk, made everything feel real in a way that the news stories hadn't. Jamal's initial instinct was to walk past, to let Harold be, but something inside him told him he needed to have this conversation. It wasn't about gloating or rubbing salt in the wound. It was about closure. A little while later, the new pharmacist handed Jamal his filled prescription with a polite smile, but Jamal's attention was already focused on Harold. "Thanks," he muttered absently as he took the bag. Jamal walked toward the back of the store, his steps slow and deliberate. Harold was still packing, oblivious to Jamal's approach. For a moment, Jamal considered turning around and leaving. Maybe there was nothing left to say. Maybe this was enough. But as he drew closer, the words came before he could stop them. "Harold!" Harold froze mid-motion, his hand hovering over the box. He didn't turn around right away, but Jamal could see his shoulders tense. After a beat, Harold slowly straightened and turned to face Jamal. His expression was unreadable at first. Surprise, discomfort, maybe even a hint of anger. But there was something else there too. Something that hadn't been there the last time they'd faced each other. Defeat. Jamal stood there for a moment, unsure of how to start. Harold had lost his job because of what happened, but that wasn't why Jamal had come to talk to him. He wasn't looking for revenge or to make Harold feel worse than he probably already did. "I heard you were leaving," Jamal finally said, his voice steady, but without any malice. Harold's lips twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "Corporate made sure of that." Jamal nodded, unsure of what to say next. He hadn't come here to apologize, but now that he stood face to face with Harold, he realized that things were more complicated than he'd imagined. Harold sighed, leaning against the counter, his eyes dropping to the floor. "Guess this is what I deserve, huh?" Jamal studied him for a moment, searching for any trace of the smug, arrogant man who had accused him of being a junkie. But the person standing in front of him now looked smaller, deflated, as if the fight had been taken out of him. "I didn't want this to happen to you," Jamal said, his voice softer now. "I just wanted to be treated with respect. I wanted you to do your job and not make assumptions about me because of the way I look." Harold looked up, meeting Jamal's gaze for the first time since they had started talking. I thought I was doing the right thing," Harold said, his voice almost a whisper. "You don't know how many people come in here trying to scam me. I thought you were just another one of them." Jamal's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "That's the problem, Harold. You didn't give me a chance. You didn't even try to verify the prescription. You just looked at me and made up your mind." Harold looked away, his face flushing with something like shame. "I messed up," he admitted. "I see that now. But it's too late, isn't it?" Jamal let out a slow breath. "Maybe it is, but this wasn't just about you. It's about the way people like me get treated every day. We're always guilty until proven innocent. That's what needs to change." Harold swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I guess I never thought about it like that." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of everything hanging between them. Jamal didn't feel anger anymore. He didn't feel triumphant either. What he felt was complicated. Harold had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. But in that moment, Jamal realized that this wasn't just about one man. Harold was a part of a bigger system, one that needed to be dismantled. "I hope you learn from this," Jamal said quietly. "Not just for you, but for the next person who walks in here." Harold looked at him, really looked at him this time. "Yeah, I hope so too." Jamal nodded once, feeling the conversation had run its course. He turned and walked back toward the door, the tension in his chest easing just a little. As he stepped outside into the fresh air, Jamal realized that he didn't need to feel victorious or defeated. What mattered was that he had spoken up. He had made sure that his voice, and the voices of others like him, were heard. Harold's downfall was just one part of a much larger struggle. Jamal didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. Change wasn't easy, but it started with people like him refusing to stay silent, and that, in the end, was enough.